This week we're quite excited because we're discussing something which, for both Nicole and I, has proven to be one of our passions to explore. And one of those things that when you really start digging into it and going deeper into it and understanding it more, has like a massive, massive impact on your life. So the preparation in going into this call we found really enjoyable. So even if nobody watches this, just going through the preparation for us was fascinating. So we're already winning at this point. But the topic for this call is using symbolism to understand life. Okay, now it's kind of a broad title. It could potentially mean many different things to many different people. So we'll cover, I think, a bit of what symbolism means to us to start off with, to create a bit of context and frame the conversation. So, Nicole, if you can start by sharing, that'd be a great point for us to begin with. What does symbolism really mean for you?
Well, I think there's several aspects to symbolism. I think it can be as simple as using symbols to know how to wash your garments. The way they use symbols on the back of our shirts and our pants, or which door to go through to go to the men's or the women's toilet, and but go as far as finding symbols in nature, finding symbols through different ancient approaches to life. The Native Americans, the Hindu. When you look back to the Greeks, all these different ancient views of the world, you find a lot of symbolism in different shapes and forms. So I think it's a very, very deep topic. Art for me is a form of symbolism because it invokes some kind of thought or reflection. So for me, that's a little bit what symbolism is. It's seeing something that isn't just a description of something, but that invokes either thought or energy or empowerment or just knowledge of some sort. What is it for you?
I think you've given a really nice starting point for it, because I agree with everything you said there, and I'd probably add on to that. Um, Symbols aren't just a visual thing. They can be something descriptive, for example. Like if you look a lot more with ancient texts, these days we're more, when we create movies or whatever, culturally we're more attuned to just being very direct with things and saying how things are. But if you look at a lot of ancient texts, symbolism was used in many, many different ways. I mean, the Bible, whether you're religious or not, is irrelevant. The Bible is just full of symbolism. And if you read it in its literal sense, then, it means something totally different to if you read it through the lens of understanding symbolism and being able to really get the message and the intent of the message behind that. And it's very much the same with a lot of different uh, religious, faith-based, spiritual-based texts of years gone by. But not only that, like fables, like when you would hear these time-tested stories that would be passed down from generation to generation to teach the children and the younger generation about the way the world is. You can't sit there and talk to a 7-year-old about the reality of adulthood, but you can certainly frame it with animals, for example, and tell a story of how the lion interacts with the monkey, interacts with the hippo in the jungle, and the child starts to actually understand the essence of the meaning. One of my favorite books is Animal Farm by George Orwell, and within that book he uses animals as symbols, essentially, because of their innate animal characteristics, to represent different people within society. And the book is incredible. I think it's like 75 pages long, and he completely breaks down society in 75 pages because of the power of symbolism. He's able to deliver this incredibly profound message in very few words when you consider the depth of what he's talking about. Uh, so for me, there's a huge piece there, and there's also another thing that jumps into my mind right now, which is dreams, because our conscious mind is very literal, it's very descriptive, it's very analytical, but our subconscious, this is more abstract. It works in the way of symbols. If you've ever explored the meaning of dreams and really gone deep into that kind of study, with people who have really studied that for many, 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 many years, you'll see that there's common symbols which occur in dreams which represent different things within lives. So again, I think symbolism is very deep. I think it's anything visual, descriptive, verbal, whatever it may be, which tells a greater story than just what it is. It means so much more. And if we think about the audio thing, you hear um I can't think what they would call it now, but during the war, the bomb siren that would go that sign. Now that evokes insane reaction and emotion in people, because you hear that sound and immediately it triggers thoughts of war and bombing and everything else, and it's just like it sends you into a completely different state. So so for me, it kind of for me it's quite broad. Is anything that evokes that trigger, like you said, I think you said, evokes a certain energy or a certain presence, and I think that's very very apt.
Mm.
Um, but there's also, symbolism is so powerful to human beings that it has been picked up, as I say, within religious doctrine and text and everything else, but also the corporate world.
Mm.
We see how corporations use different symbols, whether it be, you know, the very famous one would be Marlboro, the cigarette company, used the cowboy for many years because the cowboy is symbolic of masculinity. And they were trying to appeal to a generation of young men that, smoking is cool. And if you want to be this uber macho dude, this super alpha, then pick up a box of Marlboros and you're going to get there. And if you look at the kind of the opposite for that, the ballerina was always the symbol of feminism,
Mm.
femininity, sorry, should I say, in the same way. So it's it's really really been picked up. And then you even go as far as to look at, say, like the dollar bill, for example. We talked about this the other day, and if you look at the dollar bill, the symbolism on the dollar bill is insane. The all-seeing eye in there and everything. There's lots of little pieces, and for anyone interested, you just Google dollar bill symbol analysis or something along those lines, and you're going to find many many people who've really broken it down and gone into it, and it's fascinating when you start to look at this. Um, and then I think for me, my favorite representation of symbolism, I think where it's done most beautifully, there are a couple of cultures that for me do it in a really, really beautiful way. And Hinduism, I think the Hindus, it's incredible symbolism. Like if you see the statues of their deities, like there is not one piece on there that doesn't represent something so incredibly profound. And again, just to go into a bit of study on that is really, 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 really fascinating. And when you look at these statues, you may think initially, oh, that's very pretty. That's quite appealing. I'd like to have that on my mantelpiece. But then you start to understand what it means. And it's like, wow, my mind blown. They tell an entire story with a statue.
Yeah.
It's really quite incredible. And I know that this is something that you've looked into at quite some depth, is the way symbolism is used in different cultures.
Well, I'd say I'm very curious and I'm interested. So I've looked into it, but I would by far not want to pretend to be any kind of scholar in it or. But yeah, I find it super interesting. And you're talking about statues and Hindu statues and so forth. And there's one which in particular I find extremely interesting. And I've got a picture, I'll try to share it on the stream here. Which is actually dates back to the 9th century, apparently, the first sort of statues that you can find, which is, when you think about it, that is goes back really, really far.
Mm.
And you once shared an audio about where Alan Watts, the philosopher, talks about the Shiva dancing and the symbolism of it. And it got me really quite intrigued because one of the things he said was that in our culture, we don't have anything as rich to define or present life as it is. We have a few symbols, and if we go into something that's more sort of spiritual or religious, whatever, you might have the cross, but it doesn't, it means one thing. It doesn't mean the complexity of life. And so I went and had a bit of a look, and I did take notes because, like I say, I'm not an expert in this. But when you look at this little statue, so Shiva is one of the principal deities of the Hindu faith, but there are so many of them. There's a number of male, and there are also a huge amount of female deities that they refer to, and I'll get to a few of them afterwards, just sort of to run through them because they're just so interesting. But this particular statue is interesting because it englobes so many sides of life. It's the dance. So this represents Shiva, but it is the Nataraja dance, and it is the dance of the cosmos. And without going into all of the details, if we just look at it, he's got a number of arms and that he's moving around, and in one of them, in the top, I guess, well, looking at the picture, the top left hand, he's holding a drum, and this drum represents sort of the creation of the universe. It is the sound of the It is, some people would refer to it as the Big Bang, and in itself, that's just represents creation. There's on the other side, on his top right hand, he's holding a flame, and this is the flame of transformation. So it is life, death, renewal, and so forth, which is really interesting. He's got an open palm that is sort of facing us, which is again on the left-hand side with the lower hand, which is an assurance. It's sort of, there's nothing to fear. Everything is going to be fine. There's a lower hand that sort of shows downwards, and there's a foot sort of looking up. And these two things in combination are really interesting because the lower palm is the illusion, the veil of ignorance. There's something hidden there, and this whole notion of ignorance in the human mind. And the foot shows the liberation of ignorance. It's lifted, and it's showing the liberation of ignorance. Anyway, there are a lot of symbols in this. One of my favorites is right at the bottom of the statue. You have this little demon, sort of dwarf demon, that Shiva is standing on, and this is the ego. It is again a level of ignorance when the ego takes over, and the ego takes over, and it needs trampling to some extent, for life to really unfold properly. So it's just a beautiful, beautiful statue. And if anybody's interested, I would suggest they would go and find Alan Watts' presentation of it, because he does a much, much better job at it than I do. But it just goes and shows the richness of this one particular symbol, which is all in one little statue, and which is just super rich with information about, the universe, the world, life. So I find that really, really interesting. Just to mention maybe a few of the deities and the female goddesses of the Hindu faith, and I'm just going to mention a few just to show how interesting they are, because so there's Durga, the warrior goddess, the strength of protection, strength and protection, inner strength and protection. There's Lakshmi, which is abundance and good fortune. Kali, the goddess of revolution, and she's also considered the dark one. She's a really, really interesting character. And you've got Durmavati, I think I said that correctly, who's about disappointment and letting go. And you have many, many of these deities, and it's not about them being, people or human form. They just take a human form so that we can relate to the energy. That, it's like you were saying, it's about a story. It's like we use animals sometimes to understand the characteristics. Well, here they're presented as female or male entities who have certain characteristics, but it's more about the energy that you can connect to as you identify with these entities. And it's just very, very rich and beautiful. And when you see it from that angle, I think there's so much to learn. I don't know if there was something, I know you're really interested in also this, the Hindu symbolism. Was there something you'd like to add to that, or correct me on, possibly, if I made a mistake?
No, not at all, not at all. I think you summed it up beautifully. All I would, don't get me wrong, I'd sit here and chat about this all day, but yeah. I think it's the adding of the value. No, I think you've described this really beautifully, and I'm the same as you. I love the standing on the ego. I think it's just so beautiful. And again, you referenced there the Alan Watts piece. I completely agree with you. I'd recommend anyone finding that, because Alan Watts breaks it down in his wonderfully articulate way that's almost incomparable. So you did a fantastic job, I have to say. But
I felt like I was getting carried away.
compared to Alan Watts,
it's so rich, right? There's so much information there. You could spend hours talking about it. So I don't want to get lost in it. And I don't want to focus it all on the Hindu faith either, because it's not about the faith, and it's because it's more about the symbols. And just to sort of go into another direction, we were talking about animals and the Native Americans before. And I find it really interesting to look into that aspect of things as well, because when you look at animals, and you can just look outside, look at nature, they would look at animals that cross their path and interpret they would learn something from that crossing. They would look at that animal and say, oh, this is an animal's strength or whatever it was. What does this animal have to teach me right now? And I've played this game for a while, and it's a really interesting game to play. So I don't know if this is the point where I tell this. I may as well tell this story now. Should I tell the story now, or should I keep it for later?
Yeah, why not? Go with it.
Okay. So it was interesting because we were at a retreat where we were working on some cleansing and so forth, and we were pulling animal cards, and this was a little bit in relation to this more Native American approach to things, and I had pulled the horse. And at the time I thought, oh, the horse is interesting, but I've never been connected to the horse. So it's didn't really ring a bell. And then when I read into it, I saw that it had something to do with taking people somewhere faster and so forth. And it just got me really, really interested. And I don't want to go further into this now, because we're going to be talking more about how things have affected us in our life further on. But sort of thinking about this horse, thinking, oh, okay, this horse has the power to take people somewhere faster, wherever they need to go, without telling them where they're going, but to be led, but to let them run faster. And as a coach, that was just very, very powerful. So this kind of got me interested. And so when I look into these different animals, so when I go for a walk, I'll look around and I'll look at the birds, and I'll see what have they got, to tell me right now. And I also have this little deck, which is very interesting, which is a deck of cards, of animal cards. And every morning I just pull a card just for the fun of it. And for example, if I take one now, we'll see, so the tiger came up. I don't know where the camera is. Here we go. Let me remove Shiva from our screen. The tiger came up. And so I would sit and think about, okay, what are the powers of the tiger? What energy could the tiger be giving me today, so that I go into my day, with maybe more calmness or more power, or whatever that animal is going to give me. So it's just a fun game to play. So yeah, I think there's a lot to learn from the ancient ways in terms of symbols and things that they can bring you. So it's just a lot of fun. Yeah. So I got a little bit lost, I think.
I think it's easy enough to get lost in that topic. It's a massive topic. I mean, we're talking about symbolism, which is the central modality of teaching for cultures throughout the ages, and is the central strategy for marketing-based programming for every multinational corporation over the last few decades, or whatever that may be. So we're talking about something which is huge. It's an easy enough thing to get lost in, but I think it would be remiss of us to talk about this without talking about how symbolism acts in our day-to-day lives, and how we are actively using symbolism, whether consciously or unconsciously ourselves, to either put ourselves into a certain state or presence or energy,
Yeah.
or to let people around us know something about us that we want people to know, or let our loved ones know how we feel about them. And when we had this conversation the other day, we were talking about this point, and you know, perfect timing, you raised your hand to the screen and showed us one of these symbols, which I think everybody in the world can recognize. So let's go into that a bit, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about the ring, and the wedding ring, and the symbol that that represents. But funnily enough, even before you get to the wedding ring, when you think about the engagement ring, the engagement ring, again, it's such a symbol of love, but it was actually a marketing ploy to begin with. It was, the diamond industry that was trying to find a way to sell more diamonds, and they came up with this idea that, why not give a diamond ring as an engagement present? So it has become a huge part of certain cultures, not everywhere across the world, but especially in the US, a diamond ring is really, really important. But yes, so the ring, and when you look at the whole wedding ceremony, you think of the white dress, which represents purity and virginity and everything you want, and which, rarely is even the case nowadays because we don't have the same approaches to life, and sort of there's this incongruency between what it represents and what it, so I think we could go really, really far into trying to understand how we're trying to trick ourselves into believing certain things and they don't really match because we're not doing them. And, I think there's a whole thing behind there, but that's not the topic of today. But yeah, just if you go through the wedding ceremony and the things about, having something old, having something blue, having something new, having, and
Old,
so.
borrowed blue.
Sorry?
Old, new, borrowed blue.
Borrowed, and yeah, the borrowed one was the one I was missing. These are all symbols of things that we integrate in our daily life. Even when we look at children, we don't have to go as far as looking into what toys we buy our children, but just the fact that, pink represents little girls and light blue represents little boys. We have these symbols that we use all the time to represent demographics or whatever. If we were to look at a graph of women and men, and the men were in red and the women were in blue, we'd get completely confused. We'd probably just automatically think, the reds or the pinks are the women and the blues are the men. And so we condition ourselves with these symbols. Some of them, are useful because then we know right away what we're talking about. Like we're talking about the toilet signs, men's, women. But some of them are more charged, and we don't even realize it. So that's also really interesting. But yeah, we use symbols in our everyday life all the time.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing we talked earlier about, symbols anything can be symbolic. So yeah, I mean, when we come into the home, one of the interesting ones for me is the gesture, the gesture in the home, because we talk about anything can be symbolic. As human beings, we operate on symbols. There is so much information. The processor in our mind is not strong enough to take in every bit of information that comes at us. So we create symbols ourselves. Our mind creates symbols to understand things quicker. And there's various. So we see symbolism being very broad. And one of my favorite examples of this is it comes from some research by the Gottman Institute, who are the preeminent forerunner in research into intimate relationships, and they found that one of the sexiest things that a husband can do for a wife, and I'm not being sexist there, their research, the paper is what a husband can do for the wife, so this must have been the area they focused on, is the washing up. And one of the reasons is that as human beings, we're programmed to work well together and to sync with each other. And when we do sync with each other and we find workability, the brain releases certain happy chemicals that make us feel really good in the moment. And within the home, it's, I guess from many, many years of us living in a society where the women were the homemakers and the men just kind of came up after work, put their feet up, read the paper and waited for their dinner. That's programmed into most people to see the husband then actually step into this role more around equality and just doing what needs to be done to get to increase workability. It's one of the sexiest things, and it made me laugh when I heard it, to be fair. But it's that symbolic gesture, and we often hear this. We often hear, if we've fallen out with somebody, we've had an argument with them, what can we do as a symbolic gesture to just kind of let them know? And you think often these symbolic gestures hold no value beyond the value of the symbolic gesture itself. They're, you're just doing something just so they've seen you've done something for them. But that's the point. They've been seen, they've been acknowledged, and you've given them your presence and your attention, which is the greatest thing that we can give anybody. So yeah, I think when we look into the home, there is so much symbolism in the home, and when we start to understand it, we can really start to tune in to how we can start to harness its power and how we can start to use it in our favor. And this is one of the things that I really like about the work of Carl Jung, because he's very practical in the way that he talks about symbolism. His book, Man and His Symbols, I think it's something along those lines. He's got another one called Symbolism of Transformation. And he talks about practical ways to understand this. And again, he was a very intelligent guy, so it's always a deep read, it's a dense read. But you leave that with actual practicality and things that you can actually use. And one of the things he talks about in there, we've referenced like the sign, the toilet sign, and he talks about the distinction. He creates a distinction, signs versus symbols, and he says a sign normally indicates something very one dimensional. So if you see a sign which for example says toilet, then it just tells you there's a toilet on the other side of that door. Whereas if you see a symbol which may, that's if you don't have an emotional connection to toilets, I guess. But if you but if you see a sign that says kitchen, then that may evoke memories of standing in the kitchen with your mother or father, learning how to cook and meals in the kitchen. It may evoke deeper memory. And again, don't get me wrong, there's people out there that may have that deeper connection to the toilet, and if so, so be it. But he talks about that difference. The symbols have a greater context to them. They tell a greater story rather than just an instruction. But this again is, I think, very interesting, because the work of Carl Jung, mainly his work around archetypes, was then extended by two amazing guys called Gillette and Moore, Robert Gillette and Douglas Moore, and they really expanded the research into the archetypal energies that human beings have within them. And this is a topic that you and I love exploring. And I think we're very privileged in a few weeks or maybe 2 weeks time, I believe, to actually be interviewing our joint friend, our mutual friend, Rory Kilmartin, who's spent 10 or 15 years researching this at great depth and created an amazing body of work around it. And it's really quite fascinating. But not to go too far into that, the beauty of Carl Jung and what he does with symbols, where he goes with symbols, as I say, is he teaches it in such a way that you can start to improve your life with it. How he teaches it in a way that you can bring it into your life. So an example here would be, I touched earlier on the cowboy that Marlborough used to represent masculinity, and how organizations have used, ballerinas in adverts. And this has kind of changed more recently, but you used to see a lot of this in adverts for female products. There would be a graceful, elegant ballerina or somebody representing, very, very much femininity. And nowadays it's become a little bit more broad, rightly so as well, because not everybody falls into these boxes. But it was very powerfully used in that way. And another one of the people that we love, David Hawkins, in his book Letting Go, he talks about this in relation to glamour and the danger of glamour. Because what a symbol can do is, a symbol, because it can evoke a certain emotion or energy, or which then creates a different perception in your mind. If you attach a symbol which has glamour to a product which doesn't have glamour, then you no longer associate with the product. It's not that you're looking at that product with a logical mind and thinking, do I want it? You're looking at the associated glamour, thinking, man, I want that. And because they've so expertly enmeshed these two things together, you buy the product hoping for the glamour. You pick up a packet of cigarettes hoping to be a cowboy, when if you're already a cowboy, then that's okay. But I don't think anyone became a cowboy just through smoking cigarettes. But when you start to understand how symbols evoke the feeling of glamour within you, and this feeling of glamour is something that we all want to associate to in one moment or another, and if we allow the symbol to cloud the actual picture of the product that we're seeing and add glamour where there isn't actually glamour in the product, we can be tricked into thinking that by buying a certain product or doing a certain thing, that we're going to become a certain way. So one of the first and most powerful ways, I think, that symbolism and understanding symbolism can be brought into our life is to understand that fact, and to maybe look at the things that we choose to do and ask ourselves, what is it that we're connecting to here? cigarettes are a really easy example, so I'll stick with that for the moment. Am I smoking this cigarette because I genuinely love the taste of it, and I've decided, hey, we all have to die sometime, and I don't care about the health risks and everything else, and that's your choice, and that's the beauty of free will. Okay, fantastic. But have you tuned into it because at some point or another you saw an advert where someone really cool was smoking a cigarette and it seemed like the cool thing to do, all the cool kids were doing it, and you picked it up and you started doing it? Where is the association there? Alcohol, gambling, these are two massive ones as well. Like, advertising for alcohol always, it makes me laugh the way advertising in the UK for alcohol goes, because you have this really high tempo, this amazing scene. It's like, wow, I'd love to be at that party. That's incredible. And my God, they're all drinking Jack Daniels, and that's amazing. And that's amazing. And wow, wow, hype, 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 hype. And at the end, there'll be a little thing that says, please drink responsibly. It's like, oh, you supercharged me, and now you're delivering a sentence that I'm now incapable of processing in a sensible way. It just makes me laugh. And gambling again, gambling and online bookmakers, especially in the UK. I know different areas, different countries have different laws around this. But I've never been a gambler. I think I played the lottery once, and it's just never been something that resonates with me. Yet I'll watch these adverts and I'll feel myself thinking, like, I want to be a part of the crowd. I want to be in with those people. And they're very intelligent in the way they do these things, because they'll use, if it's talking about gambling with football, for example, they'll use very popular figures within football. There's a very popular football manager at the moment that's being used by a company in this exact way. And this guy has not only been a very popular football manager, he was on that TV show, I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. And he's very symbolic of somebody that everybody likes, and you can get along well with him, and you'd love to go down the pub and have a beer with him and all of this sort of stuff. And he's sitting on there very casually talking about gambling as as if it's nothing, and he's in his home talking about it. And it brings in this feeling of normality, that everything is fine and this is very comfortable, and me and you trust me, and he's the symbol of success, he's the symbol of friendliness, he's the symbol of everything else. And that's what you connect to. They don't sit there and say 4 out of 5 people who gamble with £100 will leave with less than 10. They don't say that in their advert, which is the truth of the actual product. So again, I won't go too far into that any further, but I think it's a useful exercise to use to actually tune into why we do the certain things that we do. Are we tuning into it because we actually, the love for actually doing it, or have we somewhere along the line bought into some kind of symbolism, which even after we've seen the advert, going ahead with that action still subconsciously connects us with the feeling we got when we saw it?
Mhm.
Another connection there that's coming through. Another really, really useful way I think symbolism can be brought into our lives, and there's a body of work that I draw from here, reality transurfing. We mentioned this in a number of different ways in our subscription site. We've got a series of videos where we talk about a couple of different aspects within here, really powerful aspects in terms of controlling your relationship to the universe and your relationship to the unseen forces and the way things happen. And it was created or channeled, or whatever you want to say there. He says channeled, again, it depends on your model of the world, by a Russian quantum physicist and philosopher called Vadim Zeland. And in there, he talks about the creation of icons. And an icon essentially is an item or an object or something or other which holds the power of symbolism for you.
Mhm.
And he teaches how you can essentially infuse anything with the power of symbolism. So you can give anything greater context and greater meaning, so that it always reminds you of things. Now, one example, when I started studying that 4 or 5 years ago, I started for the first time in my life to travel a lot for business. And this was a point when my son was a couple of years old. And I was having some real guilt issues about leaving the family to do these things, even though I knew they're essential. I wasn't just going on a lad's holiday. I was going to do good work, but I may be gone 7 to 14 days each time, and it would draw me down and I would feel disconnected. So I followed his process. And if you see, I wear beads around my hand, And the first time I started doing this, I had a set of beads, which I decided were my son's beads, and I was just the keeper and the holder of them. And at some point when he's older, then if he wants to wear beads and he wants to do that kind of thing, then there'll be a pair that have been with the intention to give him for many, many years. And what I would do is I would wear these around my hand, and because they were so infused with him and his energy, and when I looked at it, it reminded me of all the positivity about being a father and the reason that I'm going off and doing these things and doing these trips. And I would keep it here. So at any given time when I was just having a slight moment of feeling down or disconnected, it's just a matter of looking at my hand and seeing this symbol here. And then I started doing it with a lot of different things around the house, creating icons through symbolism. It's why, for example, I still have a pair of trousers which I should have thrown away about 3-4 years ago, and I just aimlessly repair every time. And they're the most tatty things in the world, and my partner hates me when I wear them. But for me, in the early stages, when I was playing this game, I infused them with a lot of symbolism and what they meant for me and everything else. And it's just a really, really fun game to play, to create your own when we know how the human mind works, kind of really, really powerfully in this way. I feel like I've been talking for a long old time there, but it's again a big old subject. But for me, they're two really powerful ways to bring symbolism into your everyday life. In firstly auditing and understanding how you are subject to the power of symbolism in your everyday life now, and how that does or does not serve you, but also understanding it at a level which means that you can create your own symbols at home, whether they be through objects, like I explained, or small gestures. One other tiny thing actually is one of the things that I started doing in terms of the gesture, the symbolic gesture, is my partner. She sleeps really well when she has a bit of lavender on her pillow. And what I would start doing is if I went to bed first, is I would put some lavender on her pillow if she was already asleep, and I'd come and put a little bit of lavender on her pillow. And I would never talk about it with her. I would never say, oh, I did this or anything like that. And after a few months, she came to me. She was like, I've never thanked you for the fact you do that. Like, and it's so nice. Like I just know that before bed every single night you think of me enough to kind of get up and do this thing, however tired you are and whatever else. And that one act of dropping a little bit of lavender oil on her pillow for her symbolized her being thought about, her being seen, her being cared about, and everything else that goes along with that. So they're the two ways I think that this can be really brought into everyday life. But what experience do you have with that?
Yeah, I think symbols, for me, it's all about awareness, and what we want to do with them. And you can read into symbols, or you can be the victim of symbols, or you can be the creator of symbols, and it's a choice. Um, you know, uh, as you know, I love to draw, and I love creating my own symbols. I use drawing and images as a way for me to connect with certain thoughts and so forth. But I also love to look at nature and find symbols in there, and for me, one of the things, and it doesn't matter what you believe really at the end of the day, sitting by the ocean, and I don't know, it was a day where I was feeling a bit down, and looking for answers, and this little crab came. This little crab came, and I thought, oh, hello. um, it came to me, and I was just sort of wondering, okay, what have you got to teach me? What can I learn from you? What symbol could you be giving me? And I watched it, and I just analyzed it sort of from the outside, thinking, okay, so here's this really weird creature that is very it's sitting on rocks, it's going through rocks, and it's got these very odd tools to navigate, you know. It falls between the cracks all the time, falls on its back, gets swept away, but it doesn't seem bothered. It just sort of rolls over somehow and puts itself back straight. And then it'll sit in the sun and just bathe in the sun and doesn't care whether I'm watching it or not. And I was just observing it, and I was taking learning from this animal. So it's about, for me, it was about consciously thinking about what do I want to take away from this crab as a symbol. So I think awareness is a big part of it. It's about deciding what you want to do with these symbols, and not just be victim of them. I know that some people believe that symbols all of a sudden show up for a reason, and they're here to teach you something, and that may well be, or not. But the question is, what do you want to do with it? And yeah, and creating symbols, I think, is a very powerful tool because it allows us to empower ourselves rather than wait for the empowerment to come from somewhere else. Just like reading, you know, things from the outside world in the way that we benefit from it. So yeah, I mean, infusing objects with information, drawing symbols, and then deciding what you want to do with them, I think can be extremely powerful.
Mm.
And we have, I think it's next week actually, a webinar where we're going to be talking about using symbols and drawing mainly. But as you're drawing images, and those become symbols. To find clarity and structure in your mind and in your life. So I think symbols are everywhere. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And it makes me think back to one of the first film shoots we did in Warsaw. We went through a couple of different exercises. One of the exercises we went through was the toolbox
Mm.
exercise. And, you know, for anyone who hasn't watched that video, there, I'll give a brief overview. You know, there's various different images which in a specific way are presented to you, and these images are there to evoke different thoughts and reactions, and essentially it's symbolism. And you see like an image of an old beat up pair of sneakers, and it gives you like 20 minutes of insight if you really sit with it and go into it in the way that Nicole guided me through in that session. And if you haven't seen it, you know, it's on our subscription site, and I'd recommend it 'cause it's wonderful. There's a lot of insight that comes from that. Um, and you know, I like the fact one of the things we have in development at the moment is concept cards, which um, Nicole is artistically creating as we speak. And I won't say too much more about those, but they lean on heavily the concept of symbolism and how we can and they're actually a tool in order to use symbolism to draw in inner resources and inner insights and really demystify your perspective on different things. And this is the power of symbolism. When you understand it, you can create these incredible tools. Um, I remember two other examples where this stood out for me, because one of our videos one of the webinars we have scheduled for it's either the end of this month or the start of May. We have so many scheduled, this I can't keep up with the schedule. I should be better with this.
Which one are you talking about?
Is, you know, how to learn anything from everything,
Mm.
from anything, and however you want to say that, because it's all the same thing. And this for me is incredibly powerful because, again, when you really tune into the power of symbolism, you can literally learn anything and everything from anything and everything. And you know, we've always heard stories in different cultures gone by about the wise individual in the village would go into the forest and spend a week by themselves. They used to call it a vision quest or a spirit quest or something in this space, and they would just be with themselves, be with the forest, no water, no food, and they would just wait until, you know, the noise and the confusion of everyday life was gone, and then they would just sit in the space of what was going on around them in nature, and would see the symbols and see symbols within symbolism, within just the natural unfolding of life around them, and they would learn incredible things about life and bring that insight and that knowledge back into the village, as it were. And you know, there was an experiment we did in Warsaw actually, which was using Lego, and it's what's the actual term? Lego something play? It's
Serious play is
Lego serious play, yeah. And I had to create a model, so Nicole guided me through it. It's another video that's on our subscription side, and um, I built this model, and again, I won't give too much away from the actual video itself, but from sitting there and building this Lego model for like 15 minutes, you know, it was fun. Don't get me wrong. Everyone loved Lego, but I got to a stage where I had just these insane insights about relationships, about intimate relationships, and how one should act within an intimate relationship, all triggered by what I was seeing on this Lego diagram this Lego structure that I built. And it was mind bending. And one of the amazing points in there is that Nicole kind of turns the model around 90 degrees, and I see it from a different perspective, and all of a sudden the symbolism totally changes, and there's a whole new set of insights. And I was blown away with how deep that could be. And again, this was just the absolute power of symbolism. And this was, this was maybe two years ago, 18 months ago, something like that. Um, I think one of my most powerful things that came through with this, we had a little ceremony of sorts at the house here, maybe 6 or 9 months ago, and we had some candles there. And partway through, there's beautiful music playing, lots of stuff going on around, and I'm just kind of sat in a meditative state, so to speak, and I'm just looking at the candle. Now, there were candle holders, and there was a candle in the top, and as the candle burned all the way down to the bottom, get the next candle, light it with the flame, and then stand it up like this in the other candle. So it kind of felt like as the flame was being passed over, the new candle was the child of the previous one. It had that kind of energy to it as I was looking at it. Now, the very first time I put the first candle in, I had to sit there and melt some wax into the bottom of the candle holder so that when I stood it up, it would stand there. But as the first one melted all the way down and I got the next one, I thought, this could be your child. This is amazing. Handing on your flame, very symbolic there. And I lit it and I thought, oh, how wonderful. Now the candle holder is full of melted wax. So how beautiful is that? The parent has created this wonderful foundation for the child so that the child can stand up tall and stand up strong from the word go, and everything is wonderful. Anyway, put it in there, it stood there. Fantastic. I then turned around to do something over here. And as I came back, the candle had fallen over. And they were sitting on this little roll-out wicker mat, and the candle had fallen over and started to burn the mat, and the mat was on fire. Not a big fire, just a small fire. So I managed to put this out and pick the candle back up again. But then I was just, the symbolism of what had happened had just hit me with this big, profound lesson for life, that as parents, we can create a really, really solid foundation for our children, and we can give them everything, everything we can think of to help them stand up tall. But they have to stand up for themselves. And if they don't know how to stand up for themselves, as soon as you turn away, as soon as you're non-present, they can fall over and they can burn the house down. And, it's about teaching or creating a situation where that child can stand up tall for themselves. And, again, and if they fall and they start to burn the house down, then it's not a big problem as long as we can get down there and we can deal with it in a sensible fashion and quite quickly. So again, just from lighting a candle and from seeing it fall over, this entirely profound insight about parenthood came through. And for me, it just goes to show, whether you're playing with Lego, whether you're looking at candles, whether you're looking at images in whatever, whether you're in a forest looking at the trees, you can learn anything from everything.
Mm-hmm.
There is something to be seen somewhere, as long as we're aware, as you said a moment ago, we're awake to what's going on around us, and we're seeing, we're not just looking.
Mm-hmm.
As we cast our view out at different things. And the interesting thing is as well, it's one thing to see these things occur and see these things take place, but of course, we want to then be able to integrate them. So, for example, the Lego insight that I had about relationships, it actually gave me some practical awareness to bring back into my day-to-day life, to actually come into my house and realize that, because again, without giving the game away for that video too much, my big takeaway, it's 20 minutes of insight that I share afterwards, but if we cut that short, it is that demand and expectation plays no role in a relationship. Unconditional love and creating a space of unconditional love creates this environment where we can all flourish and we can all grow and we can nurture each other. And to connect to that and then come back into my day-to-day life, it was about trying to find opportunities where I could make that insight and that awareness become a reality. Because this is one thing, knowing and not doing is arguably worse than not knowing. So you need to be able to come back and find some good ways on how to apply that. But I know that we've talked a lot before about daily practice, and we really recently created the fast track mini course, which is really, really cool. And one of the things in there is designing a daily practice. And I know that with your daily practices, Nicole, you use symbolism in different ways for this. So I think it's a cool time now, as we're talking about integrating this into our life, to maybe share a bit about how that works for you.
Yeah, and just as a little side note, in our little fast track program, we use a lot of symbols as well, seeing that we have animations alongside with the, so that we connect differently to the message.
Mm.
Yeah, I think the daily practice and using symbolism on a daily basis is really powerful. I mean, everybody creates their own daily practice, and a lot of people have a daily practice without even realizing it, even if it just means, putting their slippers on and turning the coffee machine on, and, in a certain sequence and so forth. But again, it comes down to awareness. And I think, yeah, being aware of the intention that you want to set, being aware of the energy that you want to embody that day. And if you whether you use cards, as a game to feel inspired, and whatever meaning you want to give it. If it's inspirational, it gives you an energy that you're lacking, on your own, then why not? And yeah, opening your eyes to what actually is useful and beneficial to you. Doesn't matter where it's coming from, doesn't matter whether it was, intentionally put on your way and on your path or not. The question is, what do you decide to do with it? And that, doesn't matter whether it was random or not. You can do with it what you want. You can feel as much power from it as you want. So yeah, conscious awareness, looking out for stuff and creating it, and creating symbols if you need them, rather than wait for them to show up. By infusing objects. I once had a client who was trying to create a practice to remember something, and I said to him, "Well, what do you need?" And he said, "Oh, I need an object. I need an object that's reminds me something that somebody's given to me." He needed to be something somebody gave to him, and he was playing with his hand. And I said, "Well, what's this ring on your finger?" And he said, "Oh, it's this something somebody gave me." He tells me about this ring, and it was exactly actually what he was looking for, but he hadn't made the connection to it. Even when he was telling me about it, he was just, and I said, "Okay, you're playing with it now, would this do?" And he's like, "Oh my God." I just didn't even realize. So it's about creating that connection to what's already there, to seeing what's already there and infusing it with it, rather than thinking I need something from the outside to tell me or to give me insight. It's just open your eyes. It's there. It's somewhere close.
Mm.
And if it's not, create it. Use your pencil. Take a piece of Lego. Take some uh, um, Play-Doh, or create what you need. That's what I would go with. How about you? What would be your final words on this topic to help people in their daily life?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm quite complete on this topic. I think we've explored symbolism in a really nice way. I think we've touched on what it means for us. I think we've explored ways that we can improve ourselves or our experience of life by understanding this. And again, just a short recap on understanding where we are subject to symbolism, where it's maybe polluted our thinking and driven us to do things that we wouldn't consciously choose to do, or maybe where we can actually connect to something. Maybe that there's an amazing thing out there for us, but the symbolism chosen by the people creating it doesn't resonate with us.
Mm.
And then we're not connecting to something fantastic because we're looking for glamour within symbolism. We've looked at creating our own icons and creating our own kind of things internally. We've looked at how we can learn anything from everything. We've looked at daily practice. So I think it's quite a useful exploration that we've had so far. So I think I'm quite complete for the conversation in this moment. Is there anything else that you want to share about symbolism?
No, I just hope that people join us next week on the mapping. And this is going to be a different format because it's going to be more of a coaching format.
Mhm.
So, although we've done this once before in Warsaw just over a year ago, where I took you through a slow mapping exercise, I'm going to do it again. I'm going to choose a different topic. And we'll invite people to actually go through the motion along with us. Yeah, all they'll need is a piece of paper and a pencil and a pen and an eraser, but that's pretty much it. Yeah, so it'll be an interesting experiment to go through again. So I wish people a great week and open eyes, and for them to find lots of symbols.
Yeah, it could be a confusing week. So amazing. Well, thank you as
Let it go with the ones that don't make sense, just let them aside.
always.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you. Have a beautiful day, and we'll have some more next week.